"We don't need your ideas anymore," she said, and the whole room held its breath waiting to see what I would do. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I reached across the conference table, mahogany, polished to a shine that caught the overhead fluorescence in a long white stripe, and pressed one finger to the center of my laptop lid and closed it. The latch caught with a small, clean click that seemed louder than it had any right to be in a room that had gone that quiet. Then I smiled, not at Meredith, not at the investors, at no one in particular. Just a smile that existed in the space between what had just happened and what I already knew was waiting on a shelf at my house on Burrell Street. "Enjoy the funding," I said. And I walked out. The room was still clapping for Meredith Caldwell when the door shut behind me. 3 people had started before the door fully closed, and by the time the latch caught I could hear a 4th joining. Soft, scattered, wrong in the way that applause sounds wrong when you are on the other side of a door from it. One of the investors from Cincinnati had shifted forward in his chair as though positioning himself to congratulate someone. I did not look back through the glass. I stood in the corridor outside the Finch and Harrow Conference Center for a moment, the kind of moment that has no sound in it. The carpet was burgundy and slightly worn at the center where 1,000 feet had passed before mine. I looked at it for a breath. Then I picked up my bag, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. I had built the Vantage project for 11 months. In 40 seconds, it had a new owner. Or so the room believed. My name is Delia Marsh. I was 38 years old and I had been a senior product strategist at Caldwell Dynamics in Dayton, Ohio for 11 years. Not 11 years of coasting. 11 years of building the kind of institutional knowledge that doesn't transfer when someone puts their name on a slide deck and calls it their vision. The kind that lives in the details of a specification document, in a client's memory of who answered the phone at 7 in the evening, in a notary stamp pressed into gray cardstock on a Tuesday morning when no one else was watching. I grew up in Kettering, about 20 minutes south of downtown Dayton. My mother worked second shift at a packaging plant for most of my childhood. She did not talk much about what she was owed. She talked about what she had done and what she could prove. I absorbed that early, the way children absorb the things their parents do quietly and without announcement, not as a lesson stated aloud, but as the shape of how a person moves through rooms. You do the thing completely. You keep the record. You keep going. Caldwell Dynamics was a mid-sized product development firm, about 240 employees, a mixed portfolio of logistics software and last-mile routing tools built over 30 years by Gerald Caldwell into something genuinely solid. Gerald was in his early 60s, and he had the particular manner of a man who had earned his confidence the slow way. I respected him. I still do, in the complicated way you respect someone who built something real and then made one decision that let the wrong person into the room. Meredith Caldwell was Gerald's daughter. She was 31. For most of the time I had known her, which stretched back 3 years to before she had any formal role at the company, she had worked in marketing at a mid-size agency in Columbus. She was polished in the way that marketing teaches you to be polished. Good at the surface of things, good at making a room feel that something meaningful has just been said. She was not unintelligent. That is important to say. She was not a fool. She was simply a person who had never been in a room where her presence required justification. 14 months before the investor meeting at Finch and Harrow, Gerald brought Meredith in as VP of Innovation. The title was freshly created. So was the reporting structure underneath it. I had reported directly to Gerald for 9 years. After the restructure, I reported to Meredith. I told myself that was fine. Gerald was 62 and thinking about succession, and a new VP layer was not unusual. I went to the first 3 team meetings Meredith ran and I answered her questions directly and I did not editorialize. But I started keeping a different kind of record. The Vantage project was mine. I want to say that plainly and without heat, because it is simply the factual baseline of everything that followed. I had identified the dispatch lag problem the previous spring, specifically the delay between driver-side incident reporting and central dispatch correction in real-time routing systems. Caldwell had 3 clients dealing with this. The lag ranged from 11 to 17 minutes per route correction. That sounds like a small number until you understand it compounds across a fleet, across a day, across a quarter, into dollars and contracts and renewal decisions. I had been watching it accumulate in the client data for 2 years before I sat down and built something about it. The framework took 6 weeks of evenings and weekends. I wrote the first functional specification at my kitchen table on Burrell Street, most nights finishing after midnight with the kitchen light the only one still on in the house. I debugged the routing logic on Saturday mornings while the neighborhood was still quiet. I ran early concepts past 2 logistics contacts I had built over years at industry events, quietly before I said a word internally. When the framework was solid enough to present, I brought it to Gerald. He approved a pilot with 2 clients I had called personally, using relationships I had built over 7 years of conference follow-ups and quarterly check-in calls, and who had agreed to participate on my word. The pilots ran for 4 months. The first pilot contract was valued at $47,200, negotiated directly by me with the client's operations director over 3 calls and 1 in-person meeting I drove to on my own time. By the time we had named the project, Vantage, a name generated in a workshop Meredith organized, which is the single contribution I will assign to her with a clean conscience, we had results showing a 23% reduction in dispatch lag across both pilot clients, and a third client in Columbus had reached out asking when they could get in line for licensing. Gerald decided to take Vantage to a Series B raise. The target tranche was $2.3 million. Investors were coming from Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and a Chicago-based logistics technology group whose interest had come through a contact I had cultivated at a conference in Columbus 2 years earlier. That contact had vouched for me personally. He told me as much in an email I still have. I had prepared my presentation for 6 weeks. I knew the pilot data cold. I had built a Q&A section for every objection I could anticipate. On the technology side, on the IP side, on the timeline side. The week before the meeting, I had gone to the Hamilton County Records Office and filed the complete Vantage development record. Timestamp specifications, pilot agreements, client correspondence, the full chain, with a county notary stamp pressed into the bottom right corner of the archival sleeve holding the USB drive. No one asked me to do that. I did it because my mother had taught me, without ever saying it directly, that the record is the only argument that cannot be interrupted. I arrived at Finch and Harrow on Thursday at 9:14 a.m. I set up the room. I ran through the first 4 slides twice. Meredith arrived at 9:31, carrying a presentation clicker I had never seen. The investors filed in at 10 o'clock. Gerald took the seat at the head of the table. I was at the screen, laptop open, the dispatch lag data slide already up, the clean number, the one that makes a room lean forward. I was 3 slides in when the door opened. Meredith did not knock. She walked in the way a person walks into a room they believe is already theirs, and she went to Gerald's end of the table and placed one hand on the back of his chair like punctuation. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said in a tone that had no apology in it anywhere. "I wanted to be here for this." Gerald smiled. "We were just getting started." I nodded and turned back to the screen. I moved to the 4th slide. "Actually," Meredith said, "I'd love to take it from here if that's all right." Something went still in my sternum. Not a flinch, not heat, just a kind of compression, like a hand pressing flat against the inside of my ribs. I turned around slowly. "Meredith." "We've been rethinking the framing," she said, already moving toward the screen, already raising the clicker. "We don't need your ideas anymore, Delia. We're going with my concept instead." One investor shifted in his chair. Another looked down at the folder in front of him. The man from Chicago set his pen down flat on his notepad and left it there. "This is the Vantage project," I said. My voice was even. "I built it." "We built it," she said pleasantly, like correcting a minor factual error. "As a team. And the team's vision has evolved." "What specifically has evolved?" I asked. She smiled. "The positioning. The narrative. The investor framing. The pilot data," I said. "The dispatch lag results. The client agreements. Are those in your deck?" "The high-level vision is what investors respond to first," she said. "We can get into the weeds later." "You're brilliant at the details, Delia," she added, her voice warm and measured, as though offering a compliment she had rehearsed. That's what makes you so valuable as support. But the room needs the bigger picture right now. I stood still for a moment. The sentence sat in the air between us, shaped like praise, built like a wall. The bigger picture is the dispatch lag data, I said. Without it, there is no project. Meredith glanced at Gerald. Dad, can you explain to Delia that this isn't personal? She's been so dedicated, and I'd hate for her to feel ungrateful for everything this team has given her. The word landed the way she intended it to, casually, as though it were simply the natural word for someone who objected to having their work reassigned in a room full of strangers. I let it sit. I did not correct it. I did not need to. Gerald, I said. Gerald looked at the table. He looked at his daughter. The 2 seconds that passed in between those two things were the most honest thing he did all morning. Why don't we hear what Meredith has prepared? He said. I said nothing for a beat. The room waited. I looked at the Chicago investor, the one at the far end of the table. He was watching me with an expression I could not name exactly. Not pity, not discomfort, something closer to a very quiet form of recognition. His pen was still flat on his notepad where he had placed it. I put one finger on my laptop lid. Of course, I said. The latch caught with that small, clean click. Enjoy the funding, I said. And I walked out. The floor felt slightly unsteady under my feet for about 4 steps. Then it didn't. Something tightened across my shoulders. Not rage, not grief, something closer to the specific weight of a decision already made, a record already filed, a sleeve already sitting on a shelf 40 minutes away. The kind of stillness that is not resignation. The kind that knows something the room does not. I pressed the elevator button. I rode down. The lobby was empty except for a woman behind the front desk who did not look up from her screen. I walked to my car. I unlocked it. I set my bag on the passenger seat. I put both hands on the steering wheel and held them there for a moment before I turned the key. I drove south on I-75 toward Burrell Street. The highway was quiet at that hour, mid-morning, between the commute waves. I watched the exit signs pass and I did not turn the radio on. I parked in the driveway on Burrell Street. I put the key in the side door and turned it. The hallway light was still on from the morning. I went inside. I set my laptop bag on the kitchen table. I filled the kettle and put it on. I sat down. I took out my phone and wrote a 3-sentence email to my personal attorney. I sent it. The kettle clicked off. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the oak tree in the backyard while I drank it. My phone rang. A 513 area code, Cincinnati. I looked at it. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 22 minutes later. Same number. I set my cup in the sink. The 3rd time I answered. Ms. Marsh. The voice was measured, the voice of a man who regularly delivered information people did not want. This is Warren Fitch, CFO at Caldwell Dynamics. I'd like to come speak with you today if you're available. I'm available, I said. This afternoon? Yes. He was at my door on Burrell Street by 2 o'clock. He was in his late 50s, compact, gray suit, the look of someone who had not slept cleanly the night before. Meredith was with him. She stood slightly behind. Warren on the front porch. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She had the expression of someone who has rehearsed an emotion they cannot quite locate in themselves. She was wearing the same blazer she had worn to every meeting that mattered in the past year, and I had the sideways, automatic thought that she had dressed for this the same way she had dressed for this morning, as though presentation could substitute for preparation. Delia, she said. Can we come in? Of course, I said, and I stepped back. We sat in the living room. Warren took the chair by the window. Meredith perched on the edge of the couch. I sat across from them in the chair I always use at that table and folded my hands in my lap. Warren did not ease into it. The Chicago investors pulled out, he said. About 40 minutes after the presentation ended. They cited concerns about the integrity of the project's provenance. I said nothing. Meredith's presentation, he continued, did not include the pilot data. It did not include the dispatch lag results. It did not include the client relationship documentation or the licensing framework. He paused. It was a concept deck. Yes, I said. I know. The remaining 2 investor groups have asked for a formal clarification of the project's origin and ownership before they will agree to reconvene. He looked at me directly. I need to know what documentation exists and in whose name. I looked at him. I looked at Meredith for a moment. Then I stood up. I went to the home office down the hall. The shelf above my desk held a row of archival sleeves in gray heavy stock card, each one labeled in my own handwriting. I found the one I needed, the Vantage sleeve, notary stamped, county filed. I reached past 2 folders in front of it and closed my fingers around it. I took it out. I carried it back to the living room and set it flat on the coffee table between us. Then I opened my laptop on the table beside it and pulled up the Hamilton County Clerk's digital record, the same files, accessible by the reference number written in black marker on the sleeve itself. I turned the screen to face them. Warren picked up the sleeve. He turned it over once, then opened the flap and slid the contents halfway out. He read the first page, the time-stamped specification record, and then flipped to the second where the pilot agreement dates were listed in sequence. He found the county notary stamp in the bottom right corner. He pressed his thumb against the raised seal for a moment, as though confirming it was real. He set the sleeve back down carefully and aligned it with the edge of the coffee table. He looked at Meredith. Meredith looked at the table. Her hands had moved from her lap to the edge of the couch cushion, gripping it lightly, and she was very still in the way that people become still when they are recalculating something they had assumed was settled. The Vantage project has a single author of record, I said. Time-stamped across 14 months, notarized at the county level, confirmed in writing by both pilot clients. I let that sit for a breath. When Meredith said this morning that the team didn't need my ideas, she was describing a project she did not build. The $618,000 in equity the investors were being asked to fund is tied to work that is formally mine. Every specification. Every pilot session. Every client agreement. Meredith said, Delia, I want you to know I genuinely believed we had. Meredith, Warren said. Once, quietly. She stopped. I'm not asking for anything from Caldwell Dynamics, I said. I closed the laptop. But I imagine the investors will want to know who built what they were being asked to fund. And now you have the answer. Warren nodded. He was already reaching for his phone. Meredith sat very still on the edge of the couch. Something crossed her face, not remorse, not exactly, but the specific expression of a person who has just understood the distance between what they assumed and what they can prove. I had seen that expression before on other faces in other rooms. It never looks the way people expect it to look. I never meant for it to go this far, she said. I looked at her for a moment. Something settled behind my eyes. Not satisfaction, not contempt, something quieter than either of those, like a drawer sliding closed on its own track, fully, without force. I know, I said. And I left it exactly there. That was 14 months ago. Caldwell Dynamics restructured the Vantage project's ownership formally, at Warren Fitch's recommendation and with sign-off from the 2 remaining investor groups, who had made it clear they would only proceed with original authorship documented and confirmed. The series be closed at $2.3 million. My name is on the licensing agreement. Gerald sent a brief email, 4 lines, professional, correct. I read it once, filed it, and did not reply. I still have the archival sleeve. It sits on the shelf above my desk in the home office on Burrell Street, in the same position it has always been in. Sometimes I reach past it without thinking, and sometimes I stop and hold it for a second, not to remember the conference room but to remember the 14 months before it. The evenings at the kitchen table. The Tuesday morning drive to the Hamilton County Records office, alone with no one asking me to go. That sleeve is not a trophy. It is a receipt. A receipt does not require anyone's acknowledgement. It simply exists and it is accurate, and that is enough. About 3 months after the restructuring was finalized, a LinkedIn message arrived from Meredith. It was 4 sentences. It began with "I've been doing a lot of reflection" and contained the phrase "I hope we can move forward" near the end. I read it on a Saturday morning while the coffee was still brewing, and I set the phone face down on the counter, and I finished making the coffee, and I carried it to the kitchen table, and I never replied. Some silences are not cold. They are just finished. I consult independently now. 3 clients, all referrals, none requiring me to be in a room where someone else holds the clicker to work I built. The work is entirely mine from the first question to the final document. What I have learned is that the record does not need to be loud. It does not need to perform. It needs to be accurate and filed and present. The sleeve was on the shelf for 14 months before anyone needed it. It did not require me to announce it. It only required me to know it was there. If you have ever built something carefully and watched someone else take the credit in a room full of people clapping, share this with whoever needs to hear it. They will know what the sleeve represents. I made coffee this morning on Burrell Street. The sleeve is on the shelf where it always is. The oak tree outside the kitchen window has dropped most of its leaves now, and the yard looks open and a little raw and absolutely fine. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. And it was entirely mine.